Hi, my name is Erlina Ortiz. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as a woman, a Latina, and a Dominican American. Please do not call me. It doesn't actually really bother me that much, but a lot of my family in the DR will call me flaca, which I'm like, okay, it's kind of like a compliment, I guess. I don't know. But it just feels like, I just don't like being called by something about your body. Like that's kind of, that's last year. And my family is from Dominican Republic as well as all over the United States. And I speak English, Spanish, a little bit of French. And my most proficient self is Spanglish. This is what looking bilingüe means to me.
But I want to hear more about your relationship with your sister because it's really unique and the way you've explained it is so beautiful. So can you tell us a little bit more about that journey, that history?
Sure. So my little sister, who is going to be 15 years old, has been living with my husband and I since 3 years. We're 3 years this month. So she started seventh grade with us. And my dad is also involved in her care. He is sort of like a co-parent in the situation. So she's usually with us during the week and then with my dad on the weekends. Sometimes she's still with us on the weekends because we always do fun stuff on the weekends. So
Go on
um
on that.
but that's and she still has a really strong relationship with her mom, and they're in constant communication. Basically, it was a conversation between her mom and my dad, and our dad about, she was finishing up at a school that she was in the Dominican Republic, and it was a pretty good school that my dad had, as an American, had the privilege of being able to sort of like pay for her to be in like a more, safer private school. And there was definitely a conversation, like she's really a good student and she's always like really taking her studies very seriously. And so there was a conversation about like, okay, it's that time to decide, is she gonna stay or is she gonna go? Because if she gets any older, it's gonna be really hard for her to transition. And if she stays, then we really need to, like, that's gonna be something for us to figure out because it's not so safe for teenage girls in the Dominican Republic. And so I had already had a relationship with her that basically I would visit her when I was in the DR and loved her a lot and was very like wanting to do right by her in the best way that I could. Um and like when she was like 5 years old, I remember hanging out with her once and just being like, this kid is gonna be a part of my life in some way. Like I
Oh,
just felt that, like, sometimes a shift in the universe where you're like,
yeah.
man, this kid is like has an imprint on me in this way. And I know that I want to do whatever I can for her when the time comes for me to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started the conversation with my husband of like, so my dad's been talking about bringing my sister here. What do you think about that? And thankfully he's, a very open-hearted, wonderful person, also a teacher, so comfortable with youth. Also, I've been a babysitter my whole life, and so he has met plethora of the kids that I've taken care of over the years, and even formed his own special bond with the little boy that I've taken care of the longest his whole life. So now he's almost 10 years old. And my husband also has, there's been days where the parents of that kid will hit me up and be like, can you babysit him on this day? He's off from school and we still have to work. And I'll be like, I can't because I'm busy, but Steve will watch him. So that's really, he's always just been somebody who's been good with kids and is an educator. And he had also met her because by then she had also started coming to visit us in the summers. Um,
Mm.
and so one summer she stayed with us for like 2 weeks, and then the next summer she was with us almost the whole summer. And so we really, cemented that bond of like, we all really like each other. And also him understanding too, like seeing what at that time when she first started kind of visiting and staying with us, it was when she was like 8 years old.
Wow.
So she was still very like, she still needed help with many
Yeah.
things as an 8-year-old. And so I think it was also a chance for him to see just, what it was like to have a kid in the house,
Oh,
and a kid that's technically your own, but that you still grow to love in this very specific way. Um,
yeah. That's
so yeah, I brought it up to him and was like, "Hey, what do you think?" And he was on board, and now she's been with us for 3 years.
and that's beautiful. And actually, to just jump off what you just said now, something interesting that you said to me was that you always kind of envisioned your parenting, your guardianship, your care for another person being atypical, non-traditional. So can you like fill me in a little bit more on that, on like what was that thought process and where did it come from?
I don't know. I've been a babysitter my whole life, so I kind of always knew how easy it was to bond and love a child, even if they're not your own. And so since I was like 13 years old, I was always like, maybe I'll have my own kids, maybe I'll adopt. Like however, I know that I want to have kids in my life somehow because I love hanging out with kids, but I never felt so beholden to the idea of how a family is formed. Um,
Mhm.
I don't think I thought about it that deeply then. It was just like it was just the way I felt, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and that kind of always carried through. And yeah, so I don't know. I just always kind of felt this feeling of that, like, I'm open to however a family might form. And so yeah, that's that's kind of how it happened. And I think I was just open to it. And so when the opportunity or when the moment started to sort of come together of like my dad reaching out to me and he's also older and being like, I'm going to need support with this. And, and I don't know. And we lived close to not far from each other. So it felt
Mhm.
very much like, maybe this is something that we should do. And I felt very little hesitation on it. I wasn't naive. I was like, this is going to be a big change, and we're going to have to adjust to having a whole nother human being that lives with us who needs our care and
Yeah.
guidance. Um, but it just felt like that was what was supposed to happen.
Yeah. And what do you think has been the most surprising or unexpected part of taking on this role?
I think because of the specific age that she's at, I'm sort of like reliving my own
Oh,
middle
I
school and
love
high
that.
school experience. And in
Yeah.
some ways, it's like it can be like, oh my God, like I remember what this is like, but also it makes me nostalgic for that time because there's so much that's beautiful about that age too, like the friendships and the sleepovers and whatever, like the new the crushes, the teacher that you hate, and like just like all the things that I remember from that time. And even though when I was in it, I definitely remember always feeling like, oh my God, like being a teenager is impossible. Um, but it reminds me of how much fun I had too. Like sometimes I'm
Yeah.
like, man, I know being 14 wasn't easy, but I think some days I would love to be 14 again.
Okay, so
So that
let's
I
go.
wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting like the good
Yeah.
and the bad also, because there's also moments of triggering of like, oh, I remember that feeling of feeling
Yes.
left out by a friend group, or I remember that feeling of like school is hard sometimes. Like every day I have to do this. like,
Why?
yes.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it kind of just reminds me of what it was like being that age.
That's what I was gonna say. It's funny because when I've thought about it, having worked with you, so while I didn't necessarily babysit, I work with a lot of youth, and I would often have those like, excuse me, those memory triggers where you're like, whoa. I have a half brother, and he's 14, and he says things, and I'm like, wow, I have an ability to really remember the way I thought even back then. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
oh, how would I have responded to this? And so it's really funny how like having young people in your life really activates that. Does it
Yeah.
feel like a really long time ago for you, or does it feel short? Because I feel like for me,
It
it feels
feels like I can't believe it sometimes that I'm the age that I'm at. Like I'm really still close friends with my friends from like eighth grade.
yeah.
So there's definitely like this feeling where like, are we all really doing this in our lives? Like, like, are we really here? Is it this many years later? It definitely feels like time is very elusive. But I don't, and I feel like an adult. I do. I feel more confident. I feel more obviously knowledgeable in so many ways
Mhm.
in the years and the wisdom that I've gained. But I feel like the core of my identity of who I was is still who I am from seventh grade.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's probably also what makes you so relatable, right? Like not only is she your sister or you're her sister, but she also can see that in you. I would imagine that
Well, we
I
have
feel like
also like a lot of fun. Like I think
yeah,
I'm very much like a playful, like I appreciate also like with her, one day we were riding our bikes and we drove past a playground. I love playgrounds. And I was like, we can get into this playground. You want to go in this playground? And she's at that age where she could very much be like, nah, I'm gonna look stupid if somebody sees me playing in the playground, because I remember that like self-consciousness of like, I gotta act cool, I gotta act grown up. And she was like, no, like, let's go. And so like to just go and be able to like run around the playground and remember what it felt and be like, tag, you're it. And like
Yes.
and like tap into both of us, like for her to like remember what it's like for her when she was 8, 9, 10 years old and could just run around a playground, to
Yeah.
me being like, I remember what it was like to be youthful and free and playful and to,
Yeah.
not let that part of ourselves go.
That's beautiful. And I love what you're saying because yeah, especially with a park, it's such a tangible physical place with specific smells, with specific memories. Like just even uh, not recently, but in the past couple of years, one day I just completely obliterated myself on a bike and I hit the ground and I was like, oh, I remember this smell.
The iron of the blood on the pavement.
Of the pavement. I was like, oh, this
Yeah.
is very miserable. But that smell is really like it wasn't a bad memory of another time I felt like that, but it was kind of like how often I was on the floor and like, kind of like
Yeah,
crawling around.
yeah.
So it's funny how that's such a bit like it's physical work, right? And the reason I bring this up is because we're both theater people and we're very active in our, well, especially you and your theater community. And so it's just really interesting how like that kind of physical play brings out these memories and these stories for you, for
Yeah,
sure.
and it forces me, like when I see her getting too serious, or I'm like, we haven't played a dominoes or a card game, or we haven't just gone for a walk outside, like all the different things. Like I'm like, oh, like I don't want, no la quiero ver aburrida, like I don't want to see her turning into an old lady before her time. And I want to also always remind her, like, you're still a kid, like you can still
Yeah.
play, like, and you can keep playing even when you become an adult. Like you don't have to let that go just because of some idea of like now I'm a grown up.
Yeah, and you know what? That's exactly what I was thinking right now because I think a gift that you're giving her knowingly, it sounds like, is that she can one day be our age and be like, "Oh, I can do this and it's not ridiculous. This could still be a release. This can still be fun."
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be something that stops at a certain place. I hate that. I hate it when us adults do that because I'm like, "No, play is forever. Just
yeah. And then it also keeps you from being able to connect with young people. Like I know
yeah.
adults who, like if there's an 8-year-old around them, they're like, what do I say to them? Like, what do I do with it? And like I'm like, come on, like you don't remember being 8? Like
That's what
just
I say. I'm like, don't you remember? And people are like, no. And I'm
yeah,
like,
I'm like, I remember
no.
being 8 and I remember the things that fascinated me or the things that I wished adults would have said to me when I was 8?
Yes. Yeah. And I think you've been through your work, have been able to stay in touch with that person that
I'm
has
lucky with that,
evolved in
yeah.
you. And so, yeah, no, I completely relate to that. But so just switching kind of like topic slightly, because just like the fact that your sister came over at the age that she did, like, to be with you. So that was 12, you said about?
He had just turned 12. Yep.
Yeah, that's a really critical age, which it's funny when I talk to people who have immigrated, that's like actually a really like, I don't know what to call a popular age, but a common age
Yeah.
that people kind of come over between 12 and 14. Um, you having, also had experiences in the DR, what's it like having someone here in not introducing them, but kind of like helping them evolve in this culture, but also helping them maintain a part of their home culture?
Honestly, it's been probably one of the biggest blessings of it. My Spanish has gotten a lot better. I'm like, we are a fully bilingual house now because, which I always dream. I'm like, I want to have a bilingual home, and so with her, that's, natural. Her English is wonderful. She's fully fluent now in English. Um, and she learned it really quickly, but we also, our comfort language is still often Spanish. Depending on what the conversation is, we'll switch in and out. Our Spanglish is ridiculous between the two of us. So and even with my husband, because he understands mostly everything we're saying, so even if he responds in English, like he'll hear us talking in Spanish.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's been great because there's also certain things that she misses that she remembers because she was there much long. She lived there till she was 12 years old. I left
Mm,
when I was 4. So, I don't have memories of special recipes or,
mm,
going to school. I never went to the school in the DR. So she brings to me a lot of the culture that comes naturally with that she's still holding on to. Um, and I definitely encourage that all as much as I can. Like I'm always like, don't, even when she first moved here, she was making new friends, and I was like, don't forget about your DR friends.
That's a
Like,
good point.
don't forget about your friends that you grew up with. Like, they may be far away, but you have all the reason and technology to continue to be in communication with your people.
Yeah.
Those are the people that you're going to talk in Spanish with. That because we live in a neighborhood where that doesn't have many kids that speak Spanish, so she pretty much is in English all day in school. So I'm like, you got to stay connected to your people who really know you, knew you who you were then.
Yeah.
And she's taking that seriously, and she's still really close with a lot of her like friends and cousins in the DR, which I think helps to balance her out a little bit so that she doesn't feel like she's just left everything behind. She definitely, like, the first year she was here, there was an adjustment period of like, what is this? Like, winter is very long, just like so many
No, the
you know
hardest lesson. The hardest
the
lesson is the
things that you
winter.
have, and just the cultural differences and all of that. And so, but she's adjusted really well, while I still think that we like have definitely held on to ourselves and who we are. Plus, in this day and age with social media, like her music taste, she'll listen to a bachata 1 second and then like a rock song the next second and then some like Billie Eilish the next, like it'll just go back and forth, and as a Gen Z immigrant at that age, then living with me, who is still very connected to my Dominican side, then with my white husband in a mostly predominantly white neighborhood, but then my entire social circle are mostly Latinos. So it's like, she's getting a very eclectic mix, and I think that's okay. I think there'll naturally be some things that will be lost, and like there's not much you can do about that when immigration happens. But I think we're holding on to a lot. And because she knows more than me, so she teaches me a lot. And I think she also takes pride in being like, do you know about X thing? Or even correcting my Spanish. If I say something wrong, she'll be like, ¿Qué tú estás diciendo? Like she'll like check me and be like, that's not how you say it. So,
Oh my
and
God, I love
yeah,
that.
so I think I'm very grateful to have her in my life for that reason. And I hope to always be trying to make sure that she stays connected to where she's from, who our
Mhm.
people are, the history of our people, and being proud of that and not feeling like that's something that she needs to hide.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And I love your comments on how she's continuing to teach you and has even like the way that I envision it is that like you've always been connected, of course, but now she's an extra, even stronger connection. Like I just kind of envision like a
Definitely.
stronger like root branch to that and almost like a reminder of that. When you were and I am being mindful of the time. Do you have a hard stop now?
What time is it?
3:30.
No, no, it's okay. I could probably go like 5 more minutes.
Perfect. Um, when you were growing up, if we could just go back and kind of think more about your upbringing, what was, tell us more about where you grew up, what your upbringing was like, especially coming over when you were 4, because while it was pretty early on, there might be some memory or some understanding of kind of the both
Yeah.
situation. So yeah, so
Yeah, yeah. I still remember very clearly the feeling of like, I don't know what anybody's saying. Like, and not understand, and like knowing like there's this like weird, I still remember what it was like watching The Lion King and not knowing what was happening, and asking my mom questions about like, well, what's going on? Because I would just watch the images. But I also, like, I just told somebody this recently, like I learned English watching The Lion King. I watched that
The
movie.
Lion King is it?
According to my mom, I would just watch it back to back to back to back to back all day. And there was a couple other Disney movies like that, but The Lion King was the main one. And then I would just walk around the house pretending to be a lion. Um, but yeah, so like I still very much remember that feeling of like, I don't know what's going on. And then, but the first neighborhood that we lived in was a predominantly Black neighborhood. And so I felt more like the language is off, but then I also felt like that was the only thing that I really noticed,
Mhm.
because in the DR, predominantly the people that were around me were Black and brown people. I was the little white sheep. So so that aspect of it didn't, like, I never really actually had that sort of cultural shock of like white America until I was in college. Because
Mm.
then after we lived in that neighborhood, which the main thing that I noticed in that neighborhood was that most of the little girls always wanted to play with my hair. And I didn't understand why. And I have very straight hair. from my mom's Spaniard grandfather. Um,
Mm,
so that was like a new thing because in the DR, I don't think like my hair was just always like, I guess people did that, but I didn't remember it. I remember that very much a specific memory of like all the little girls being like, "Can we play with your hair?" And
yeah,
I
yeah,
special, oh, they want to play with my hair.
yeah.
Um,
That's
but
awesome.
yeah, so but then we moved to Reading, PA, which is where I grew up mostly and my whole life, and that's a
Oh, I don't think I knew that.
yeah. I
I
grew up in the city of Reading.
I
Uh,
lived there for a year and a half. I don't know if I told you that.
I feel like I remember at one point we had like made that connection, but yeah, so and that was a multicultural, predominantly Latine community that I grew up in, and that was just like what I thought was normal.
Yeah,
I thought that's what the whole world was like. I thought I'm like, this is great. Like my friends were also Dominican or mixed or black or Arab. Like all my friends were so many different backgrounds. And that was what I was always most comfortable with people from lots of different backgrounds, different cultures. And there was always an appreciation for each other's cultures as well. It was never like, oh my, like in Philly, there was definitely a little bit like I had learned later that there was like a Dominicans versus Puerto Ricans thing that was going on and like
yeah, yeah,
stuff like that. But really in Reading, like that just wasn't like, at least for the majority of my experience there, it wasn't the case. It was like we were all so mixed together and intermingled that
yeah.
it would have been ridiculous to say Puerto Ricans here, Dominicans here, because half of us were half Puerto Rican, half Dominican. Like we were all, everybody had multiple backgrounds,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
No, and it's funny because I've thought about that the time that came up to me was in college where people often mistook me rather for Dominican. I was like, oh no, I'm Puerto Rican Cuban. And I remember one guy, he was like, no, you're not. And I was like, I'm not. And then other people, and I was like, no, I am. But I'm like, why is he still like, he's like, no, I could see that you're Dominican. I'm like, no, like, and then another person was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And I was like, no, it's okay. Like, it's not a crazy concept, right? And I remember thinking, whatever issue that is, like, that's not my issue. So I don't,
Right, yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, I don't know what it is. I don't really care to learn the origin of why we need to be dramatic about that. But it's also because we're so mixed. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Like I say, I'm like the boat made different stops, y'all. Like
Literally.
I can't be like, nitpicking because like who knows?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I appreciate you sharing your story, and I know it's been quick,
Yeah.
and I think it's just so important for people to hear the perspective of someone who is doing something that is not just, knowing somebody and being with somebody from birth through, their whole life, but I think that selflessness that you have exhibited and that excitement for it and that understanding of how guardianship and parenthood could look very different, I think is just a beautiful story that needs to be told more often. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for asking me to share.